Nobody wins against a police detective.
His badge just became federal evidence.
Vanessa Hargreave didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She stood at the edge of my driveway, heels planted like she owned the concrete beneath them, clipboard tucked against her chest, eyes flicking toward the splintered boards at my feet as if they were trash waiting for pickup. That structure violates community standards. I looked past her shoulder. The ramp was already broken, handrails snapped, screws scattered across the cement like spilled teeth. "You didn't even wait for me to get home," I said. She smiled, thin and practiced. We acted within our authority. I took out my phone and turned the screen toward her. That authority ends where federal law begins. And this? I tapped the photo of the ramp, time-stamped, permitted, inspected. This was never illegal. If you've ever felt your stomach drop watching someone in power cross a line they can't uncross, stay right here and hit subscribe now. Vanessa, no, the board chair, as she liked to remind people, tilted her head, unimpressed. "You can appeal later. You've got 48 hours to restore the property to its original condition or the fines start." I finally said my name out loud, slow and steady. I told her I was Michael Carter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just let the weight of who I was settle between us. A civil engineer, 15 years working with residential code, accessibility compliance, inspectors who don't bluff. The tyrant in heels didn't flinch, but her grip tightened on that clipboard. Behind me, the front door creaked. Emily's chair rolled forward until it stopped short of the steps. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The silence was heavier than shouting. That ramp wasn't a convenience. It was how my daughter got to school without being carried like cargo. It was how she came home from physical therapy exhausted but proud. Watching it torn apart felt like watching someone lock a door she'd just learned how to open. The clipboard queen cleared her throat. "Your personal circumstances don't override the rules." Rules. I tasted the word like something spoiled. 2 months earlier, the same board had approved holiday inflatables taller than my roofline. Now they were calling a wheelchair ramp an eyesore. Vanessa handed me the notice, paper slapping against my chest. "Sign here to acknowledge receipt." I didn't sign. I asked one question instead. "Who authorized the removal?" Her eyes flicked just once toward the street, toward the HOA truck pulling away, toward a decision she was already trying to distance herself from. Neighbors had gathered, pretending to check mail, pretending not to stare. I caught Linda Alvarez's worried look from across the way. I wondered how many of them had made quiet changes to their homes and hoped no one noticed. I crouched beside Emily and felt the grit of broken wood under my palm. The ramp had been smooth once, safe, built to exact slope, exact width, built with care. "This isn't over," I said, not to Vanessa, but to myself. She turned on her heel, satisfied, already moving on to the next house, the next target. The enforcer in crimson believed this was done. Standing there, heart pounding, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to let the law do what it was designed to do when people like her forget who it protects. Before I went inside, I looked up and asked you something I needed to know. Where are you watching from? Because what happened next didn't just change my house. It changed the whole neighborhood. The next morning, I stood in the community clubhouse, a beige box of fluorescent lights and stale coffee, the place where complaints went to die. The air hummed with the copier's whine and the soft thud of binders hitting the counter. Vanessa Hargreave was already there, crimson blazer sharp against the dull walls, arranging papers like props. The board chair didn't look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. I waited while she finished aligning her stack, each edge squared, each tab visible. The clipboard queen liked order because it made her feel untouchable. When she finally glanced up, her smile carried the same certainty I'd seen the day before. She motioned to a chair without warmth. I asked for the violation history tied to my address. She slid a thin packet across the counter, fingers lingering as if daring me to challenge it. The tyrant in heels spoke about precedent and community harmony, her tone smooth, rehearsed. I listened. I watched. I noted how she avoided my eyes when I asked who approved the removal. While she talked, the room filled. Linda Alvarez took a seat by the window, hands folded tight. A couple I recognized from down the cul-de-sac hovered near the bulletin board, pretending to read flyers. Every few minutes, someone else drifted in, drawn by rumor. The enforcer in crimson kept going, voice steady, explaining how exceptions led to chaos. Then the pattern emerged. A pergola denied because it cast shadows. A veteran cited for a flagpole 2 inches too tall. A widower fined for a bench he needed to rest. Each story came out sideways, whispered, interrupted by Vanessa Hargreaves' insistence that rules were rules. She spoke often, name invoked like a stamp of authority, correcting dates, minimizing impact, closing files. I felt heat rise in my chest, not rage yet, something colder. This wasn't enforcement. It was pressure. She escalated quickly, demanded compliance first, appeals later, fines stacked like sandbags. People nodded because they were tired, because fighting felt expensive, because the board chair made it feel lonely. A maintenance request window rattled open behind the counter. Someone slid a form through, hands shaking. The clipboard queen took it without looking and dropped it into a bin labeled review. The bin was already full. I stepped back and let the room speak. Linda's breath caught when the ramp came up. She talked about her husband's walker, about steps that felt steeper every year. Others murmured. The tyrant in heels tightened her jaw and reminded everyone this was not a public forum. When it was my turn again, I asked one simple thing: why no hearing? Vanessa Hargreave answered with policy language, vague and flexible, the kind that bent toward power. The board chair cited aesthetics, property values, cohesion. She said my issue was emotional, not structural. I left with copies that proved nothing and a clearer picture of everything. Outside, the sun was sharp, the parking lot buzzing with cicadas. Neighbors followed me out in ones and twos, careful, hopeful. No one wanted to be first. Before I reached my car, Vanessa Hargreave appeared again, close enough for me to smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive. She reminded me of deadlines, of consequences, of neighbors who'd appreciate compliance. The enforcer in crimson lowered her voice and warned me that making noise only made things harder. I thanked her for the advice and kept walking, pulse steady, mind racing. Behind me, I felt eyes on my back, the weight of a board that believed silence was surrender, always. I realized then this wasn't about my ramp alone. It was about a system that worked because people stayed quiet. As I drove away, I knew the next move wouldn't happen here. The clubhouse was her stage. I needed a different one she couldn't control in this place alone. Robert Myers was leaning against the gate when I returned that afternoon, shoulders stiff, hands tucked into his uniform pockets. He wasn't supposed to be on my side, or anywhere near it, but there he was, caught between duty and conscience. The clipboard queen had given him orders yesterday. Remove the ramp, no questions asked. And he'd done it, just like that. But now his eyes tracked me, and I could see the hesitation pulling at him, tiny but unmistakable. Vanessa Hargreave swept past, heels clicking on the pavement like a metronome. The board chair didn't glance at Robert, just gestured toward the maintenance truck with a flick of her wrist. The enforcer in crimson had that same calm certainty, like she expected absolute obedience. But Robert's jaw clenched as he watched her leave. The tyrant in heels believed she could intimidate everyone, including the people she depended on. But Robert's body language betrayed doubt. I stepped closer, crouching near the crushed boards of the ramp. "I need your help," I said softly, though loud enough for him to hear. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide, mouth tightening. He didn't answer immediately. He shifted weight from one foot to the other, fingers brushing the fabric of his uniform, as if testing its loyalty. The clipboard queen wouldn't notice, but I did. I've trained my attention to details that reveal truths without words. Vanessa Hargreave had gone inside, probably to call a board meeting or draft another notice. I watched the shadow of her moving across the clubhouse windows. The board chair exuded control, but the enforcer in crimson's absence was a vacuum Robert was being pulled toward. He looked at the ramp, at the splintered wood, at Emily's empty chair just behind the door. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. There was a storm inside him, quiet, but growing. I stood and gestured toward the neighborhood beyond the fence. "You saw what happened. You know it shouldn't have. You don't have to be part of it." My words didn't need explanation. His expression said everything. He wanted to obey, but a part of him, the part that remembered fairness, remembered children, remembered dignity, was straining against the orders he'd been given. Robert's gaze flicked to the street where a few neighbors had begun to notice the missing ramp. Linda Alvarez's eyes met his briefly, a silent message. He hesitated, hand brushing the gate's metal, fingers lingering where the latch clicked. Every instinct screamed compliance. Every heartbeat whispered defiance. The enforcer in crimson had trained him well, or so she thought, but the tyrant in heels couldn't command what she didn't see. "I can protect you," I said, voice firm but calm. "No retaliation if you step forward." His shoulders shook slightly, one shoulder rising, one falling, a subtle surrender to his conscience. The clipboard queen may have thought she had him tethered to her rules, but she underestimated the weight of witnessing wrong done firsthand. He exhaled, a small sound, almost swallowed by the wind. The decision was made in silence. His body shifted toward me, cautious, like testing whether stepping into the open would snap a tether or break a chain. I could see it in the tilt of his head, the softening of his stance, the tension in his fingers easing slightly. He was still conflicted, still wary of Vanessa Hargreave and the board chair, but for the first time he was thinking for himself. The ramp behind us, though broken, stood as a symbol. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was access, dignity, the fight against someone who assumed power over the vulnerable. And Robert, conflicted witness, might be the key to showing that power was not absolute. He glanced back one last time, towards the clubhouse, towards the shadow of Vanessa moving through her kingdom of rules and fines. Then his eyes returned to mine, steadying, a silent agreement forming. He wasn't ready to act yet, but the first seed of defiance had taken root. I didn't rush him. I knew patience mattered here, that the enforcer in crimson couldn't control a mind that had already glimpsed its own morality. Vanessa Hargreave believed she had everyone, every policy, every procedure in her pocket, but she didn't account for the quiet fracture within her ranks, the conflicted witness who could tip the balance if the right guidance came at the right moment. And in that fleeting pause, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway, I realized something vital. Sometimes the strongest allies are the ones you have to wait for, the ones whose conscience must speak before their actions follow. The next morning, the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, but I knew better. Vanessa Hargreave was already making her rounds, the board chair in full swing, clipboard clutched tight like a weapon. I watched from the porch as she stopped at the Hendersons' house, pointing and lecturing, the enforcer in crimson style evident in every sharp movement. The tyrant in heels wasn't satisfied with one ramp. She wanted absolute control over every inch of the street, every angle of the driveway, every perception of order. Her presence radiated authority, but it also left a trail of unease in those she passed. When she turned her attention back toward my home, I could see her calculating. She'd sent the maintenance crew again, this time with stricter instructions. Remove anything resembling a temporary structure, note every irregularity, and record compliance. The clipboard queen didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. I could feel the tension in the air, almost physical, as if every neighbor watching from their windows knew something bad was about to escalate. Inside, Emily watched from her chair, fingers gripping the wheels. Her eyes followed every movement, every shadow that crossed the driveway. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and whispered, "I've got this." The ramp behind us, still partially dismantled, wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was a symbol of the battle ahead, and Vanessa Hargreave, the board chair, had just escalated it to a new level. A truck pulled up. Two men in HOA uniforms stepped out, glancing nervously at the street before approaching. I could see Robert Myers in the passenger seat, his eyes flicking toward me, conflicted, tense. He was part of the escalation now, though he hadn't yet spoken, hadn't yet decided where his loyalty would fall. The clipboard queen's orders were clear, but the human element, the conscience she couldn't command, was beginning to show cracks. I opened the door, letting the men in without a word. Vanessa Hargreave would have expected outrage, a confrontation, perhaps an immediate threat, but I held my calm. The tyrant in heels had underestimated one thing: knowledge. Years of inspecting structures, interpreting code, understanding what was legal and what was abuse. The enforcer in crimson could not intimidate that. Minutes later, a message buzzed on my phone. Another notice from the HOA, Vanessa's signature stamped across the digital page. She demanded restoration, threatened daily fines, and subtly hinted at further legal action. The board chair had made it clear: surrender or pay. But beneath her polished veneer, I could sense impatience, a subtle shift as if she were aware that the situation might no longer be entirely under her control. I studied the message, then looked at Emily. Her small, trusting eyes met mine, and I knew that this escalation wasn't just about fines or rules. This was about her ability to live, to move freely, to exist in a home that should be safe. The clipboard queen's authority was strong, but the personal stakes, my daughter's independence, were higher. I walked to the front gate, surveying the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, a few daring to step onto their porches. Every eye added weight to the situation. Vanessa Hargreaves' power was visible, tangible, but now it also carried a vulnerability. She was visible, committed, and predictable could be leveraged. I returned inside and began cataloging the damage, mentally noting each violation of procedure, each step taken without proper hearing. The enforcer in crimson would see compliance. I would see patterns, breaches, and the slow accumulation of facts. Every threat, every notice, every act of overreach built a foundation for action, not confrontation, not violence, but leverage. Vanessa Hargreave had escalated, and in doing so, she had opened the door to accountability she couldn't anticipate. By evening, the sun cast long shadows across the driveway. The ramp, partially rebuilt by local volunteers under my guidance, stood as a temporary barrier against the board chair's pressure. The tyrant in heels may have thought her escalation would intimidate us, but instead, it sharpened my focus. Every move she made, every order given, was another thread I could follow toward resolution, and Robert, conflicted witness, was silently watching, weighing the right moment to step forward. The next morning, I decided it was time to see the full extent of what we were dealing with. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, keeping my eyes on the pattern of enforcement. Vanessa Hargreave was already in motion, clipboard queen in hand, inspecting another homeowner's exterior lights. The tyrant in heels moved with purpose, directing her team, her presence like a magnet pulling attention, forcing compliance with every step. The enforcer in crimson had that calculated gaze, the kind that watches everything and misses nothing, and I knew Robert was trailing somewhere behind, conflicted, weighing his conscience against duty. I stopped in front of my own driveway, Emily's chair tucked in at the side, the broken ramp still an open wound against the concrete. I could feel the weight of the neighborhood watching, and I let it settle, the tension stretching out before me like a wire. Vanessa Hargreave passed on the street, greeting a neighbor with an overbright smile, the board chair in full control of her image. She didn't see me standing in plain sight, but I saw her, every calculated gesture, every flick of her hand. The clipboard queen may have thought her authority was absolute, but I had tools she couldn't anticipate. I pulled out my phone and opened the local government building permits database. Every entry was public, every approval transparent. If Vanessa Hargreave had thought her actions were insulated by bureaucracy, she had miscalculated. The enforcer in crimson had rules to enforce, but she couldn't rewrite history. Every ramp, every addition, every violation or approval was logged. I compared my daughter's ramp permit to the notices she had issued. The discrepancy was clear. The tyrant in heels had overstepped, citing imaginary violations, ignoring proper procedure. Robert appeared at the edge of the driveway, shoulders tight, shifting weight, eyes flicking toward Vanessa, who was now moving down the cul-de-sac, waving at someone, clipboard in hand. I could see the internal struggle in him, subtle but unmistakable. Every glance at her, every hesitation, spoke of guilt mixed with fear. He hadn't yet committed, but he was beginning to see the cracks in her armor. I walked the property line, mentally cataloging each infraction. The enforcer in crimson had been meticulous in documenting what she considered violations. But in her zeal, she left traces of procedure that could be verified and challenged. Every step she had taken without notice, every directive she had issued without proper authority, could now be cross-referenced with official records. Vanessa Hargreave may have thought she was untouchable, but untouchable didn't mean invisible. I made a list of phone numbers, neighbors, local inspectors, even a few contractors who had worked in the community. If this escalated legally, documentation from impartial witnesses would be invaluable. The clipboard queen might have controlled the narrative inside the clubhouse, but outside, the pattern of overreach was visible to anyone paying attention. Every public-facing interaction, every documented inspection or denied request was a piece of the puzzle. As I walked back to the driveway, Emily wheeled herself closer, watching me with quiet concern. The ramp behind us, still partially dismantled, was a testament to both the board chair's aggression and our persistence. I tapped my notes into the phone, organizing observations, recording what could be presented to authorities. The tyrant in heels had made her move. Now it was time for me to leverage the law in response. I glanced toward the clubhouse. Vanessa Hargreave was gathering her papers, preparing to leave for the day, probably thinking the issue would fade by tomorrow. She underestimated the patience required to counter authority with fact, precision, and persistence. The enforcer in crimson might have believed her compliance ensured loyalty, but I knew Robert was watching, and the seeds of action were beginning to grow. By late afternoon, I had a full dossier: permit logs, photographs of the ramp before and after destruction, notes from neighbors, and a clear record of procedural missteps. The board chair's escalation had inadvertently created the very evidence I needed. Every threat, every notice, every visit reinforced the chain of wrongdoing. The tyrant in heels may have thought she was tightening her grip, but she had only laid the foundation for accountability. By mid-morning, the tension in the neighborhood was almost tangible. Vanessa Hargreave was out again, clipboard queen persona fully activated, pacing the cul-de-sac, stopping at houses to point out minor imperfections, every gesture deliberate. The tyrant in heels had escalated her campaign, sending notices that piled like storm clouds over anyone who dared deviate from her imagined standards. I stayed inside, watching through the window, Emily beside me, fingers clutching the wheels of her chair. She didn't speak, but her eyes held the same question I carried. How far would this go before it ended? I reviewed my notes from yesterday, each entry a breadcrumb leading to the truth. The enforcer in crimson couldn't cover procedural violations that were recorded in public files, yet Vanessa Hargreave acted as if no one could trace her missteps. Every visit, every inspection, every fine notice was a potential mistake she didn't know I was cataloging. My mind mapped the strategy, turning her escalation against her. The clipboard queen thought escalation intimidated me. In reality, it sharpened my focus. Emily shifted, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper in my chest. That ramp wasn't a matter of convenience. It was her independence, her freedom to move safely, a right no one, not even the board chair, could revoke. Each threat Vanessa Hargreave had issued, each fine she had piled, only made the stakes more personal. And now, those stakes weren't abstract. They were urgent, pressing, demanding action. I couldn't wait any longer. I called Robert Myers, the conflicted witness who had been lingering at the edges of this conflict, and arranged a subtle meet. He arrived in uniform, eyes scanning the street, aware that Vanessa Hargreave could appear at any moment. The enforcer in crimson would have expected compliance, but Robert's hesitation showed he had begun questioning authority. I needed him to see that the escalation we were facing could be countered, and that intervention through proper channels was the way forward. We walked the property line, discussing the sequence of events, the timeline of notices, and the violations of procedure. Robert's gaze occasionally flicked toward the clubhouse where Vanessa Hargreave often held court, clipboard in hand, enforcing every imagined rule. The board chair had escalated to intimidate, but she had left behind threads we could follow. Robert nodded slowly, the first signs of commitment in his posture, the tightness in his shoulders easing. I went over my plan aloud, testing it, visualizing each step. The enforcer in crimson had no control over official records or public permit files. Vanessa Hargreave may have thought she had cornered us with threats, but the truth was accessible to anyone willing to look. Her escalation had painted a trail, a pattern of overreach that even casual observation could verify. Every demand she had made, every visit, every notice, contributed to building a case that could not be ignored. Emily rolled closer, watching us intently, her small hands gripping the wheels as if she could pull the resolution toward her. The ramp behind her, damaged and dangerous, was a symbol not just of authority over property, but of the personal cost of injustice. That symbol anchored the urgency. I felt a surge of determination. This was no longer theoretical. Every escalation by the clipboard queen had made the fight more personal, more immediate, more urgent. We couldn't delay. By late afternoon, we had assembled enough preliminary evidence and observations to present to outside authorities if necessary. Vanessa Hargreave's pattern of escalation, the fines, the unilateral removal of the ramp, and the procedural missteps were all documented. The tyrant in heels believed her actions were insurmountable, but she hadn't accounted for careful observation, methodical record-keeping, and the willingness of a conflicted witness to step toward the truth. Escalation had sharpened our focus. The stakes had become personal. The path to action was clear. Robert Myers showed up before dawn, uniform neat, but tension etched into every line of his posture. The conflicted witness I'd been waiting on had finally decided the time to act had come, and the weight of that choice was visible in his eyes. Vanessa Hargreave, the board chair, hadn't expected anyone to defy her orders, let alone someone from inside her own enforcement ranks. The tyrant in heels believed loyalty could be enforced through fear, but fear alone couldn't erase conscience. We met near the side of the driveway, out of immediate view from the street, but with a clear line toward the damaged ramp. Emily watched from her window, small but alert, as if sensing that something pivotal was about to happen. The enforcer in crimson was invisible here, yet her influence lingered in Robert's careful posture, the hesitation in his gestures, the way he glanced toward the clubhouse even when she wasn't there. It was clear he had spent nights debating his next step, weighing the consequences of breaking rank versus the moral cost of silence. "I can't ignore it anymore," Robert said finally, voice low, measured. "Every step I took yesterday, every notice I delivered, it didn't feel right. The board chair, Vanessa Hargreave, she's crossed a line. She's made this personal." His eyes flicked toward Emily's chair and the broken ramp behind her. The clipboard queen's handiwork was on full display, a testament to unchecked power. The tyrant in heels may have thought her escalation was absolute, but here was the first crack. He revealed details I hadn't yet known. Internal memos, notes about improper approvals, even comments from other board members questioning whether Vanessa Hargreave had followed procedure. "She's been cutting corners," Robert admitted, frustration tight in his chest. "Pretending compliance exists where it doesn't, ignoring rules when it suits her. I was complicit, but I've documented what I've seen." His confession was precise, deliberate. The enforcer in crimson might have trained him to follow orders, but she couldn't train conscience. We walked the property line together, him pointing out visits he had made, fines he had delivered, and misstatements he had heard from the clipboard queen herself. Each revelation added weight, a piece of the puzzle that showed a consistent pattern of overreach. Vanessa Hargreave believed her authority insulated her, that her escalation strategy would cow every homeowner into submission. Instead, it had created a record that could be leveraged, a chain reaction that her own tactics had triggered. Emily wheeled herself closer, sensing the tension in the air. Robert lowered his eyes briefly, then met mine with a quiet resolve. "I'm ready to help," he said. "I'll provide testimony, my observations, the sequence of events. I'll stand by the facts, not her narrative." The board chair may have relied on loyalty and fear, the tyrant in heels counting on compliance, but this was proof that individuals could choose integrity over intimidation. As we returned toward the driveway, I felt the subtle shift in control. Vanessa Hargreave, the enforcer in crimson, the clipboard queen, all of them relied on predictability, on the assumption that people would follow her lead without question. Robert's confession disrupted that assumption. The path to accountability was now visible, and the stakes had moved from principle to momentum. We paused by the ramp, Emily watching, small hands gripping the wheels. Robert's voice was calm but firm. "Anything you need documented, I can provide. Every visit, every fine, every order from the board chair. If it helps, I'll testify." His body relaxed, the tension of indecision giving way to purpose. The tyrant in heels may have thought her escalation would intimidate us, but it had done the opposite. It had created allies where she expected obedience. For the first time since Vanessa Hargreave began her campaign, I felt the tide shift. The conflicted witness had stepped forward. The enforcer in crimson had lost her invisible control, and the board chair's relentless escalation had provided the proof we needed. The dominoes were ready to fall, and this was the first one moving. The evening sun cast long shadows across the driveway as I began laying out the counterplan. Vanessa Hargreave had escalated with precision, the board chair believing her orders would crush any resistance. The clipboard queen had thought procedure alone gave her power. The tyrant in heels had made the mistake of underestimating methodical preparation. Every visit, every fine, every notice she had issued was now a stepping stone for strategy, and I intended to use them all. I set up a small table on the porch, spreading out my notes, photos of the damaged ramp, and Robert's observations. Emily wheeled herself close, watching intently, her fingers resting lightly on the wheels as if she could help hold our momentum. I organized everything chronologically, every act of overreach by Vanessa Hargreave meticulously paired with evidence from public records, photographs, and testimony. The enforcer in crimson had trained for efficiency, but she hadn't anticipated the precision of counter-preparation. Robert arrived, carrying his own notes. His eyes flicked toward the clubhouse across the street where the board chair had been seen earlier, clipboard in hand, issuing last-minute instructions to a neighbor. The tyrant in heels exuded confidence from a distance, unaware that her escalation had already created leverage. I could feel the shift. The narrative was beginning to bend in our favor. We started assembling the evidence package. Photographs of the ramp before and after removal, copies of public permit approvals, detailed logs of visits and fines, and Robert's first-hand accounts. The clipboard queen had been thorough in her documentation, but her meticulousness worked against her when combined with verified public records. Each piece told the same story: procedural overreach, unauthorized destruction, and threats that exceeded authority. Vanessa Hargreave's escalation was now building the foundation for accountability. Emily leaned forward slightly, eyes curious and alert, as if sensing the significance of every step we took. I explained the plan in quiet tones to Robert. "We're not just documenting," I said. "We're structuring this so the HOA can't ignore it. Every action they've taken adds to the case. Escalation has worked in our favor." The enforcer in crimson might have predicted fear or intimidation would paralyze us, but patience and methodical preparation were proving stronger than her compliance tactics. As the sky darkened, I outlined the sequence of public reporting, evidence presentation, and neighbor notifications. We would approach this strategically. First, demonstrate procedural missteps. Second, leverage Robert's testimony as a conflicted insider. And third, create a clear, verifiable record of escalation and violation. The board chair believed she controlled the narrative, but the tyrant in heels couldn't account for systematic preparation grounded in fact. Robert nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I can testify to everything," he said. "Every visit, every warning, every order from Vanessa. The board chair thinks her escalation is intimidating, but it's just exposure waiting to happen." His acknowledgement made it clear that the first step, securing a conflicted ally, was complete. The enforcer in crimson's influence had diminished with his commitment, a subtle but crucial victory. We moved on to logistical planning. Who would photograph the ramp during inspections? How to record interactions without interference? How to time notices for maximum impact? Each detail was deliberate, each step designed to protect Emily and ensure the record was undeniable. Vanessa Hargreave, the clipboard queen, and the tyrant in heels might still try to maneuver, but now their every move could be anticipated, captured, and countered. By nightfall, the plan was fully mapped. The driveway, partially repaired ramp, and attentive neighbors were the setting for our next moves. Escalation from the board chair had inadvertently laid the groundwork for methodical strategy. Every act intended to intimidate had become a tool for accountability. The enforcer in Crimson's attempts to enforce loyalty were now irrelevant. Robert's testimony and our evidence package were ready. The next phase was set: precise execution, turning escalation into opportunity, turning authority into exposure. The morning air was crisp as I stepped onto the neighborhood street, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, Emily trailing close behind in her chair. Vanessa Hargreave was already making her rounds, clipboard queen persona fully activated, eyes scanning driveways and lawns like a hawk. The board chair's escalation strategy had been relentless, but now each step she took would be documented, every violation recorded, every threat mapped. The tyrant in heels might have thought her intimidation was invisible, but our preparation had turned the spotlight directly on her. Robert Myers joined us, uniform neat but relaxed, carrying his own notes and photographs. The conflicted witness was no longer hesitant. His commitment was clear. The enforcer in crimson had trained him for compliance, but methodical planning and conscience had aligned to override fear. I handed him a sequence sheet showing which inspections and visits would be recorded, which neighbors had witnessed interactions, and which patterns of overreach had been logged. Vanessa Hargreave's orders, once an obstacle, were now part of the strategy. We began our surveillance along the cul-de-sac, Emily wheeling herself beside me, fingers lightly brushing the wheels, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. Every glance from neighbors became potential testimony, every curious stare an unintentional witness to the clipboard queen's actions. The board chair may have believed her authority could isolate us, but visibility was our ally. Each of Vanessa's steps, the tyrant in heels' calculated movements, contributed to the growing record we were constructing. I stopped at the corner of my driveway, photographing the partially repaired ramp from multiple angles. Robert mirrored my actions, noting discrepancies between the notices issued by Vanessa Hargreave and the documented approvals in public records. The enforcer in Crimson's influence had no bearing here. We were operating within transparency, using facts and observation to counter authority. Each image, each note, each log detail became part of the preparation phase that would ensure the board chair's escalation could not withstand scrutiny. Neighbors began to notice our presence, peeking from windows and stepping onto their porches. A few nodded subtly, acknowledgement of the injustice they'd quietly witnessed. The clipboard queen may have assumed loyalty or fear would suppress awareness, but our methodical visibility was changing perceptions. The tyrant in heels relied on secrecy, on the intimidation of unchallenged authority, and each attentive neighbor disrupted that. We moved from house to house, documenting interactions, photographing the ramp's current condition, and recording any irregularities in the enforcement patterns Vanessa Hargreave had established. Robert observed meticulously, noting the details the board chair had likely considered trivial but which now became critical. Every visit, every interaction, every instruction issued by the clipboard queen added to the framework of accountability we were constructing. The tyrant in heels escalation had become a roadmap for strategy. Emily remained quietly observant, her presence underscoring the stakes. The ramp was no longer just a physical object, it was the center of a methodical counteroffensive. Robert's notes aligned with mine, forming a cohesive sequence of events ready for presentation. Vanessa Hargreave had escalated thinking she controlled the narrative, but each step she took was now part of the evidence trail. By late afternoon, our preparation phase was complete. Photographs, neighbor accounts, Robert's testimony, and public records were all organized in a precise, chronological package. The enforcer in Crimson's role as overseer was effectively neutralized by careful documentation. The clipboard queen and the tyrant in heels had unknowingly created the evidence necessary to challenge their own escalation. Every move she had made, every threat issued, every inspection performed had been turned into a tool for accountability. As the sun dipped lower, Emily and I wheeled back to the driveway, Robert close behind. The ramp stood, partially repaired, a symbol of both resilience and the meticulous groundwork laid for confrontation. Vanessa Hargreave may have believed escalation ensured dominance, but now it had set the stage for exposure and eventual justice. The next step would be execution, turning preparation into decisive action. The next evening, tension hung over the neighborhood like a held breath as I rolled Emily toward the community center. Vanessa Hargreave had called an emergency compliance walkthrough, her favorite phrase when she wanted an audience without calling it a meeting. The board chair liked control in motion, liked people watching her authority stride past them. The tyrant in heels arrived early, crimson blazer sharp against the gray concrete. Clipboard queen already flipping pages as if the outcome were pre-written. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering. I felt eyes on Emily's chair, on the ramp photos tucked in my bag, on Robert Myers standing a few steps behind us. The conflicted witness adjusted his collar, jaw tight. This wasn't the public confrontation yet, but it was the setup. The enforcer in crimson thought she was staging a warning. In reality, she was walking straight into our frame. Vanessa Hargreave stopped short when she saw Emily beside me. Her smile flickered, recalculated, then hardened. "This won't take long," the clipboard queen said, voice crisp, projecting calm authority. "We're here to document ongoing violations." She emphasized violations like it was a verdict already decided. I let her talk. I'd learned that silence made her fill space. The board chair paced toward the ramp, heels clicking, pointing out imagined angles and measurements. Non-compliant slope, the tyrant in heels announced. Unauthorized materials. Each claim was loud enough for neighbors to hear. Phones lifted, murmurs spread. Vanessa Hargreave didn't notice. She never did when she thought she was winning. Robert stepped forward when she motioned for him. "Take photos," the enforcer in crimson ordered, not looking at him. His hand hovered over the camera. For a second, I saw the old fear flash across his face. Then it passed. He photographed exactly what we'd planned. Wide shots, timestamps, context, not her narrative, the truth. "That's enough," Vanessa Hargreaves snapped, finally realizing control was slipping. "I'll handle documentation." The clipboard queen reached for the camera. Robert didn't hand it over. The pause was small, but it rippled through the crowd. The tyrant in heels stiffened. "I'm required to maintain an independent record," he said quietly. Not defiant, just factual. The board chair's eyes narrowed. She'd trained him too well to miss the shift. I spoke then, measured, calm. "This walkthrough is being observed," I said, gesturing subtly to the neighbors, "and recorded." Vanessa Hargreave laughed, sharp and dismissive, but her shoulders tightened. The enforcer in crimson hated witnesses she didn't command. She turned back to the ramp, circling it like a prosecutor. "You were warned," the clipboard queen said. "Twice." She looked at Emily, then away just as fast. "Non-compliance has consequences." Emily's hand brushed mine, steady, grounding. I felt the weight of every night she'd asked if she'd done something wrong. The tyrant in heels thrived on that kind of doubt. I wouldn't give it to her. "Then note everything," I said. "All of it." Vanessa Hargreave froze. The board chair understood traps. She just didn't realize she was already inside one. The walkthrough ended abruptly. No citations issued, no threats followed through. The enforcer in crimson packed up, face tight, avoiding the neighbor's eyes. Vanessa Hargreave left first, heels striking faster than before. Control lost, if only slightly. As the crowd dispersed, Robert exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. "She's nervous," he murmured. I nodded. Preparation had shifted the balance. The next move would force her hand, and this time she wouldn't see it coming. I wheeled Emily toward the car, the night air cool against my skin, mind racing through contingencies, cameras, witnesses, timing, pressure points. The board chair would escalate, call favors, miscalculate again. Preparation wasn't loud, it was patient. And patience, I'd learned, was how bullies lost without understanding why. Tomorrow would decide whether fear ruled this place or accountability finally walked its streets together. The meeting hall buzzed before I even reached the doors, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, tension thick as heat. This was the place Vanessa Hargreave trusted most, the room where she usually controlled the narrative with a gavel and a practiced smile. Tonight, the board chair stood at the front beneath harsh fluorescent lights, crimson blazer vivid against the beige walls, the enforcer in crimson framed by her own authority. A crowd packed the rows, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, phones already raised. I took a seat near the aisle with Emily beside me. Her presence shifted the air. People noticed. Whispers followed us down the row. The clipboard queen cleared her throat, tapping the microphone. "Let's come to order," Vanessa Hargreave said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "This special session addresses ongoing violations threatening community standards." She didn't look at me when she said it, but everyone else did. She launched into her agenda fast, like momentum could drown out doubt. Charts flashed on the screen. Selective photos, cropped angles. The tyrant in heels narrated each slide with certainty, painting herself as protector, me as problem. Murmurs spread anyway. Too many had seen the walkthrough. Too many knew the ramp. When she opened the floor for comments, she expected silence. That was her mistake. I stood. The room shifted. "You've misrepresented what's been documented," I said, keeping my voice even. "And you know it." Vanessa Hargreave smiled tightly, the kind that warned without words. "Please sit," the board chair replied. "You'll have your turn." She hadn't planned on giving it. Robert rose behind me. Chairs creaked, heads turned. The conflicted witness looked smaller under the lights, but his hands were steady. "Madam Chair," he said, and the title sounded heavier than usual. The enforcer in crimson frowned. "State your point," she snapped. "The records shown omit context," Robert said. He swallowed, then continued. "I was instructed to capture images that supported enforcement. I was also instructed to exclude timestamps and surrounding structures." The room went still. Phones lifted higher. The clipboard queen's pen froze midair. "That's absurd," Vanessa Hargreave cut in. "You're mistaken." Robert shook his head. "I'm not." He reached into his bag and connected his device to the projector. Gasps rippled as uncropped photos filled the screen. Dates, measurements, accessibility codes highlighted. The tyrant in heels stepped back as if the images might touch her. "This meeting is out of order," the board chair barked, gavel striking. The sound echoed, hollow. "You're violating procedure." Boos answered her. The authority she wore like armor cracked in real time. I spoke again, louder now, not shouting, just clear. "You claimed compliance was impossible," I said. "You claimed safety risks." I gestured to the screen. "Those claims aren't mistakes. They're choices." The crowd murmured agreement. Someone clapped. Then another. Vanessa Hargreave leaned into the microphone, voice sharp with strain. "This board will not be intimidated." Laughter cut her off. The clipboard queen's script was gone. She glanced at the other board members. They avoided her eyes. Questions flew from the audience. Accusations, demands. The tyrant in heels tried to regain control, but the room had turned. Accountability had momentum now. Robert stepped back, shoulders sagging with relief. He'd crossed the line. There was no returning. The meeting dissolved into chaos she couldn't command. Vanessa Hargreave slammed the gavel again and again, each strike weaker than the last. I sat down beside Emily, heart pounding, watching power slip from the enforcer in Crimson's grasp. This wasn't the end yet, but it was the moment everyone saw her clearly. And once seen, tyranny never fits the same way again. I walked out of the hall into cool night air, the crowd spilling after me in fragments of stunned conversation. Behind us, Vanessa Hargreave lingered near the dais, no longer towering, the board chair suddenly smaller without the room's obedience. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, not for her, not yet, but the sound threaded the moment with inevitability. By morning, consequences moved faster than gossip. Emails stacked up from neighbors who'd been silent for years, thanking us, asking what came next. The enforcer in Crimson tried to call an emergency session, but quorum evaporated. 2 members resigned before lunch. The clipboard queen released a statement blaming process confusion, then pulled it down an hour later. City officials arrived before noon. Not documents, not favors, just eyes and tape measures and questions the tyrant in heels couldn't interrupt. They walked the ramp, nodded, tested clearances, and spoke in plain language anyone could understand. When they left, their cards sat heavy on the table she once ruled. Vanessa Hargreave attempted control one last time, knocking on doors with rehearsed sympathy. It didn't land. The neighborhood had changed. People compared notes. They remembered past threats, fines, selective enforcement. The board chair's confidence curdled into anger, then into quiet. The vote happened at dusk in a borrowed church basement, packed and patient. No speeches, no theatrics. Names read, hands raised. The enforcer in Crimson lost her seat by a margin that shocked even her allies. The gavel passed to someone new, steady, unglamorous, fair. Applause rolled like rain, finally breaking heat. I stood with Emily afterward at the ramp, the symbolic line between exclusion and dignity. She ran her fingers along the rail, smiling, unafraid. The tyrant in heels drove past once, slowed, then kept going. Power hates mirrors. What stayed with me wasn't victory's noise, but its quiet. Neighbors who'd avoided eye contact now waved. A widow asked for help navigating a repair. A veteran rolled up and said thanks without ceremony. The community learned a muscle it forgot it had. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. I learned something simple and hard. Rules matter, but people matter more, and bullies rely on isolation to survive. When the clipboard queen tore at accessibility, she expected compliance, not solidarity. She misjudged the room, and the room answered. Later that week, letters arrived confirming what the walkthrough showed, and training replaced threats. New policies prioritized access, timelines, and respect, written in plain terms, shared publicly, and enforced evenly. The enforcer in Crimson watched from the sidelines as neighbors volunteered for committees, learning rules instead of fearing them. The clipboard queen's style dissolved under sunlight, and the tyrant in heels found no stage left. Repairs finished quickly. Lighting improved. Sidewalks widened. Parents pushed strollers beside walkers and chairs without apology. Insurance premiums dipped. Property values steadied. The lesson traveled beyond our street as nearby boards asked questions and copied the framework. Change, once started, kept going. People talked at block parties about fairness, about listening first, about how dignity compounds when protected, and how silence breaks when courage feels shared, ordinary, and repeatable. None of it required heroes, just neighbors choosing steadiness over fear, patience over ego, and care over convenience. That choice reshaped us quietly, permanently, the way good infrastructure does for everyone, every day, without exceptions or excuses. I looked back once more before going inside, listening to crickets replace shouting. The board chair's shadow was gone from our street. In its place sat something sturdier than fear, a path that let everyone come home.